Welcome to the Eternal Light channel, where we explore the deepest mysteries of the soul and the most perplexing enigmas of life. Today, we begin a challenging yet profoundly mysterious journey. Why does God break those he has chosen before he uses them? Why, before granting them power and employing them to accomplish great things, does he let them undergo breaking? There is an indescribable feeling, something vague yet very real, like a faint light piercing through the dense darkness of life, which we only catch sight of when we are lost in the darkest corners of our soul. People often think that breaking is the end, the death of dreams, of faith, and irreparable collapse. But no, it is the beginning of something new, profound, and beyond all that we can imagine. That breaking is not merely a fracture of body or spirit, but an invisible process of cleansing, a purification that can only be felt by a soul worn down and refined through pain and loneliness. Like precious material that must be forged in blazing fire to shine, humans must endure long nights without light, moments that seem utterly hopeless, to be broken so that from those tiny fragments, a new, purer, and stronger version can be born. Friends, breaking is not easy to accept, and perhaps many of us have been or are feeling shattered in circumstances that seem hopeless. But I invite you not to give up quickly, not to deny the value of those experiences, because precisely in the darkest moments, in seemingly endless pain, God calls us to come closer to him, to step into a life not merely of existence, but of meaningful and influential life. Let us share your thoughts and feelings about this. For every perspective is a piece of the puzzle that helps us better understand the profound meaning of breaking in the journey of faith. And don't take your eyes off the video, because Sign 8, one of the most important parts of this journey, will bring you answers and guiding light you should not miss. Eternal Light warmly greets you all and sends the deepest wishes of peace. Let us open our hearts, embrace the truth, and continue this journey of discovery together. Why do those whom God chooses often have to endure seasons of pain that seem unbearable? Why, among millions of lives that float lightly and smoothly, are only a few thrust into endless pits of loneliness, lostness, and brokenness down to the very marrow? This question endlessly echoes in the mind of the traveler, dragging himself through the dark land of trial, no longer strong enough to hope, yet not despairing enough to surrender. In a world where everything seems arranged by a cruel and unchangeable law, the small human is swept into a shapeless world, only knowing that every step is soaked with blood from wounds they did not inflict. It is not a punishment, not retribution for some forgotten sin, but a mysterious ritual where brokenness is not the end, but a dark beginning for a metaphysical journey, a journey that only chosen souls can enter. God, if he truly looks down from somewhere, perhaps uses his silence to reveal an undeniable truth. No one can carry divine glory without first being completely crushed by his own hand. The way a life is bent, molded, pushed into hopeless situations, it is not merely a sequence of random misfortunes, but a fierce selection, an unrelenting purification system where every cry of pain is not a complaint, but the silent call of a sacred preparation. Those whom God has used, figures like Abraham, Moses, David, or Job, none escaped passing through a land of death. None retained the intact shape of their old self before stepping into their calling. And if this is true, then brokenness is not merely a necessary condition, but an essential part of the Creator's metaphysical plan. Like a sculptor who must shatter a stubborn stone before carving the shape of something eternal upon it. The bitter paradox of the calling is this: God does not use those who have never been destroyed. He does not anoint vessels that have never been cracked. He does not place crowns on heads that have never bent and wept in dark nights with no way out. And the most painful thing is not the breaking itself, but the realization that the very one we worship is the one allowing it to happen. That is the spiritual moment pressed against a wall, where reason is strangled by countless unanswered questions, where the heart grows foolish in the poisonous wind of sacred silence. And then, amid that panic, something strange begins to rise, a kind of faith no longer dependent on miracles or promises, but simply pure surrender, like a person dead, yet still opening their eyes. The chosen never walk on paths paved with flowers. They do not carry light without having lived in darkness. They do not touch others without having been abandoned. They cannot heal without bearing the deepest wounds. They cannot lead without being led into the desert to die. This is not the glory of humankind, but transformation through suffering, a slow, silent, yet thorough process where the old self is shed like a snake's skin so that the new self can appear. And in that process, they are no longer themselves. They are a form broken, yet shining from the ashes, like a shattered mirror reflecting light in ways an unbroken one never could. Kafka once wrote, "A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And if that is true, then the breaking God allows is the most terrible axe, aimed straight at the frozen core of the human soul, the place where true new life can begin. The unbroken cannot be shaped. The unbroken cannot understand hope. The one who has never lost all cannot hold anything truly valuable." And so, before entrusting anyone with great responsibility, God often lets them go through brokenness, not to crush, but to birth, not to punish, but to transform, not to end, but to begin, a beginning beyond all logical order, where pain is no longer the enemy, but the silent companion of destiny. 8 truths about why God allows brokenness. Number 1, brokenness opens our eyes to what truly matters. Brokenness, if it could be named by any other word, would perhaps be a form of ruthless purification, a silent yet irresistible purging, where what once blinded the soul's eyes is peeled away in patches, like the dry skin of a creature struggling to shed its old self amid the delirium of the ego. The things we once believed to be the goal, the reason to live, the recognition of others, status carved by praise, comforts that cocoon us like a silkworm's cozy yet suffocating chrysalis. Relationships we thought were bonds, but in reality were just vines wrapped tightly around our ribs. All of these, once brokenness creeps in like an unhellable crack, begin to fall away, melt down, or are clawed off by the invisible talons of destiny. The terrifying truth is that no one knows they are blind until a light pierces the seemingly dead pupil. And it is precisely that moment, not a light to guide, but one to burn, that marks the beginning of awakening. Not awakening of the intellect, nor understanding by knowledge, but a kind of wisdom that passes through flesh, bones, and every stretched and torn sinew. Brokenness is like being thrown from a roof you once called home. Yet it is also from that fall that a migration begins, not through geography, but through being. Like Abraham, who was called out of familiar lands, out of names and old frames of reference, to step into a journey without a map, where each step was paid for in loss, but also brought him closer to a destiny he never fully understood. Brokenness in that sense is not an end, but the removal of a veil, a curtain hanging between us and reality. And when that veil is torn away by the very hand we once prayed to, we begin to realize that much of our former life was but illusion, a stage where we were both actor and audience, intoxicated by our own performance until the stage itself burned down. It is within those ashes that something truly begins to stir, a hunger not for bread and shelter, but for truth, a thirst not quenched by water, but only by the presence of something greater than ourselves. And despite the pain, brokenness is the only door through which a person, in all their nakedness, weakness, yet holiness within their limits, can step and see, for the first time, what truly holds value. Number 2, brokenness helps us cut away what silently harms us. Brokenness, like a harsh but necessary hand, does not come to caress but to remove, as if there were a hidden blade beneath the velvet fabric we call life. And one day, without warning, it will strike. Not a gentle cut like a painless surgery, but a slash in the night, a sudden tear with no explanation, no preparation, no mercy. And we, stunned and confused, cannot understand why what we loved, what we cherished deeply, what once was the only light in a labyrinth, is broken, discarded, or allowed to decay by that very hand, the hand we have prayed to. Yet amid the bewilderment, a piercing question stabs through our bleeding flesh like a cold needle. Does this truly save us, or is it slowly killing us? There are things in life, Kafka might say they are gilded cages, beautiful, alluring, safe, yet cages nonetheless. And we, like blind creatures, crawl inside, lock the latch from within, and call it blessing. It may be a stable job that drains our soul through endless, meaningless meetings. It may be a warm but toxic relationship where we exchange truth for a counterfeit love. It may be a habit, a belief, a gift, once received as a blessing, but now a rotting root sucking the life out of us. We do not see it because the blindest person is the one who believes they are blessed. And then God, or fate itself, will cut, not out of malice, but out of life. Not to harm, but to save whatever can still be saved before everything sinks into invisible decay. Thus, brokenness is the act of a spiritual surgeon forced to amputate a gangrenous limb while the patient screams and begs to keep it. But only when the bleeding stops from the severed part do we understand that what we called blessing was killing the true living part of us. And once separated from it, even while still smelling of burnt flesh with scars yet to close, we begin to breathe for the first time with oxygen no longer poisoned. Not every liberation is gentle. Some are born screaming in a dark room when all has been stripped away. And in that darkness, quietly, true life begins. Number 3, brokenness helps us hear God more clearly. There is a kind of silence that the world does not understand, not the quiet of a fading afternoon or the deep sleep in an empty city, but the emptiness that opens after the self is shattered, as if a tower collapses onto its own foundation, leaving dust and ash swirling in the air, and in that hazy dust one can hear what was before utterly buried beneath the clamor of inner cheers and the endless parade of proud will. It is precisely in that brokenness, when there is nothing left to cling to, no reason to resist, no identity left to defend, that the soul opens its eyes, not to see, but to listen. And strangely, when the voice of the self falls silent, the voice of the other rises, not like thunder, but as a slow, clear whisper, coming from the deepest place of solitude. Perhaps this is why Moses did not encounter God in the palace. The palace is a place of glory, of plans, of noise, where every step is choreographed in a powerful dance, where the light does not come from heaven but from manufactured lamps. It is a place where the self does not die but is adorned, where it is not erased but praised. No, God does not speak within those gilded walls because the hearts within are full of illusions. Moses had to step out, not by choice, but because he was pushed out, forced to leave, like a nameless fugitive. Only after 40 years of wandering, when the wound had festered, when memories had become a burden, when he no longer dreamed of the throne or hoped to redeem mistakes, then the burning bush appeared. Not a fierce blaze of hatred, but a quiet flame, burning to capture the attention of a seasoned soul, burning like a question amid despair. People often think God speaks in the temple, but in truth, he waits for us in the wilderness, where no one witnesses, where words echo in the mind unanswered, where no mirror exists for us to admire ourselves, where all illusions are burned away and what remains is emptiness. And that emptiness is where the true soul appears, unmasked and unprepared. Brokenness, therefore, is not only the condition to hear God, but the ear born from the very crack. God has spoken before, but we have never been silent enough to listen. And brokenness, like a silent revolution, comes to clear that place, opening a sky clear enough for the word to enter without distortion by the echoes of a dead self. Number 4, brokenness shatters the illusion of self-sufficiency. There comes a moment in a person's life, not when the body is weary or the mind is exhausted, but when the entire system of beliefs, carefully built like a safe cocoon, collapses without a trace, and one is confronted with the terrible truth. They are not enough, not strong enough, not smart enough, not moral enough, not steadfast enough, not trustworthy enough, simply not enough at all. This is not a philosophical discovery or a moral lesson, but a suffocating nakedness, as if a huge door suddenly crashes down right before your eyes, and behind it is a dense darkness that the light of self-reliance cannot penetrate. In that moment, the ego, which had once been the center, the hero, the planner, the creator, is stripped from its throne and thrown into the corner like a broken doll. And strangely, at that very moment, a voice arises, not from any human lips, not as a sound, but as a presence. My grace is sufficient for you. From then on, everything changes without anything needing to change at all, because there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, nothing left to strive for. One begins to see things never seen before. The sky remains the same, but no longer feels alien. The rain still falls, but no longer carries the sting of rejection. There is no miracle, Only a soul that has acknowledged its lack and found a place where that lack is accepted, not with the mockery of life, but with quiet mercy. Before, people thought they had to become strong to be used by God, but in truth, God never competes with an ego that is still alive. Only when there is nothing left but Him does He truly become everything. Brokenness, then, is a disguised grace, not a punishment, but a forced landing from the cloud of pride, not a failure, but a liberation from the illusion of self-power. Those who have passed through that brokenness will no longer say, "I did it," but will whisper, trembling and grateful, "God did it through me." And perhaps that is why those who are broken the deepest become quietly gentle and dangerously powerful, because they have died, and the only thing alive in them is an unshakable trust. Number 5, brokenness gives birth to an unshakable purpose. There is no true encounter with God that does not leave a wound, and no new identity is born without passing through a long, dark night where everything we thought we knew about ourselves is torn apart like an old garment before a storm. When Jacob wrestled with the angel that night, he was not simply fighting a supernatural figure. He was wrestling with his own memories, a deceptive past, an unfinished destiny, the looming fear of Esau's approach, and above all, the deep fear that he was not enough. That struggle was not merely resistance, but the dying gasp of the old self. When dawn broke, he was no longer Jacob, the heel grabber, but Israel, the one who wrestled with God and man and prevailed. Yet that victory did not bring a crown, but a limp, a permanent uneven step, because the wound became a part of him and at the same time the mark of his calling. Brokenness, at its deepest meaning, is a painful but bloodless birth. One is no longer allowed to return to the old form, no longer able to find the previous path, no longer able to pretend to have never heard the call in the night. And purpose, once born from the ashes of brokenness, is not easily shaken by the winds of life. It no longer depends on praise or recognition, no longer seeks success or comfort. It becomes like an inner scar, painful yet sacred, as if every limping step still moves toward an unchanging horizon. That wound is not a sign of failure, but a testament to a divine encounter. And from then on, the bearer of the wound no longer lives invisibly among the living, but as one who has died and been reborn, with eyes that see through illusion, hands no longer trembling from lack of control, and feet that, though crippled, stand firmly on new ground. Perhaps the world does not understand that limp. Perhaps they mock the sudden change in voice, in gaze, in how that person no longer struggles, no longer needs to win. But they do not know that on that night, in a place where no one witnessed, that person was touched by a power beyond all discourse, and in that touch, all faint purposes were burned away to make room for a purpose that cannot be shaken. To live as what God had in mind when He broke the hip of a wanderer. Number 6, brokenness trains us for battle and compassion. In the deep darkness of the cave, where sunlight barely trickled through narrow cracks, David did not just find shelter, but sat to learn. Not in bright lecture halls, but in the academy of pain, where every tear, every labored breath, every silent loneliness became his first lessons in life and war. There are lessons that cannot be learned from books, cannot be absorbed through speeches, but only experienced through a weary body and a fractured soul. These are lessons of perseverance, of endurance when everything seems to be against you, when the enemy is not only the opposing forces, but also the doubt within your own heart. In the brokenness of those lonely days, David not only trained his muscles, but also sharpened his heart, not to harden it against suffering, but to soften it, to feel, to empathize, to have compassion. Battle is not only the clash outside, where spears strike iron shields, but also the silent wars within, where will and faith are tested, where pain constantly presses but is never allowed to conquer. One only truly becomes a leader after enduring the storms within oneself, after falling and knowing the need for someone to pull you back up. David in the cave learned how not only to claim a throne, but to become a healer for the spiritual wounds of his people, a person who listens to the silent cries of the broken, who understands that victory is not always won by physical strength, but by deep understanding and compassion. It was in those months of endurance, in the breaking and pain, that David was forged into a leader, not only through power, but through kindness, not only through resilience, but through the ability to support others. The one who has been wounded knows how to use their hands to heal. The one who has been hurt knows how to use their heart to comfort. And perhaps only in the darkest places, during the bleakest days, can a person find a light bright enough to guide themselves and others. David was not only a warrior, but a healer, tempered through years of suffering, so that when he stood on the peak of glory, he never forgot the days in the cave, where brokenness was not the end, but the beginning of the power of compassion and endurance. Number 7, brokenness distinguishes between fleshly desire and divine calling. In the tangled maze of the world, where the noise of the crowd blends with the faint echoes of personal ambitions, brokenness shines like a cold light piercing through the fog, clearly distinguishing between vain fleshly desires and the sacred calling that sometimes even one dares not face honestly. Not everyone who follows a crowd, nor everyone exalted by the masses, is chosen by God, because the path God sets is not always the crowded one, but often a narrow road few dare to tread. In the story of Gideon, there is an undeniable truth. God did not keep the mighty army, but preserved only a small group, so few that it seemed insufficient to win, just 300 out of 32,000. It could only be a harsh selection, a painful filtering no one desires to undergo. Yet it clearly proves that victory does not come from numbers or worldly symbols of power, but from the deep authority of the Most High and the complete trust of a person in Him. Perhaps that brokenness is how God cleanses the illusions of personal power, removes the seductive false calls, and reveals the true nature of the calling. In the breaking, one faces terrifying emptiness and heart-wrenching loneliness, when all vanity and so-called crowds vanish, leaving only oneself and the profound voice of the soul. This is not punishment, but purification. It is the harsh choice of truth when one must ask, am I following the call of the flesh, the ego, or a power beyond all petty desires? Gideon stood there, with only 300 left, not as a failure, but as a symbol of absolute trust, a person who had learned to let go of all false securities to place full faith in the one guiding him. It is the bitter irony of fate that true strength lies in recognized weakness, in acknowledged smallness, and in accepted frailty. Only when the flesh is stripped away, when the trivial is cut off, can the calling emerge like an unquenchable flame, a mission that cannot be overshadowed by the noise of the world. Like one walking a dark path, Gideon and his followers had nothing but the faint light of faith, a light strong enough to pierce the thickest darkness, strong enough to break the chains of pride and challenge every rule of this world. And in that brokenness, the raw truth of being chosen was revealed, that power is not in numbers, but in the presence of the Holy Spirit, not in shouts, but in the silent voice of faith and obedience. Therefore, brokenness is not the ultimate loss, but a clear separation, a test to recognize what belongs to the flesh and what belongs to the true calling. And when all else is stripped away and only the illuminated truth remains, the chosen one will rise, not by their own strength, but by the irresistible power from above. Number 8, brokenness is the preparation step for multiplication and service. There is a strange and paradoxical truth at the heart of brokenness, like a simple, humble loaf of bread that can only truly become a source of life for many after it is broken into small, scattered pieces, as if its wholeness were an unbreakable limit, an invisible wall separating life from giving. In the harshness of the fracture, in the crackling sound of the shards, lies a mysterious power, the power of multiplication, of service, that cannot exist if it remains intact as a solitary, isolated, and closed object unto itself. And those who have experienced that brokenness, even if they may not realize it immediately, become channels for the flow of blessings, bridges connecting personal pain to collective salvation, from fragmentation to inseparable connection. People often see brokenness as a sign of failure or collapse, but in truth, it is an indispensable preparation for a new journey, an unceasing journey of multiplication. Just as bread must be broken to be shared, to nourish, to create life for those around it, humans must also undergo the shattering of self to truly become a source of blessing, a source of strength for the hungry, the lonely, and the wounded in need of healing. There is something miraculous in that brokenness, a silent miracle, a quiet sacrifice that itself accomplishes the greatest thing, the spreading of grace, the multiplication of love and life. But brokenness is not an easy process, not a smooth path anyone can walk without pain. It is a breaking apart, a stripping away to the core, until the rigid parts of the ego, the protective shells thought to be safeguards, crack and drift away with the flow of time. And in that moment, when everything seems lost, the truth is revealed most clearly. Humans do not exist for themselves alone, but to give, to serve, and to multiply. That breaking prepares the soul, softens the heart, and widens the spirit to receive and dispense blessings that before, perhaps, we never thought we could share. Those who have been broken, shattered, are precisely the ones who can most deeply see the pain of others, feel the hunger of souls that only they have once experienced. They become vessels filled with oil, not only to be anointed themselves, but to bring that oil to those who need healing, to anoint the dry, lost souls. They are no longer isolated individuals, but branches of a great tree, connected into an inseparable network, a network of endless love and service. Thus, brokenness is not an end, but a beginning, the opening step toward a life multiplied, given away, and lived with a purpose no longer solely for oneself, but for the vast world. The breaking does not end the story, but opens a new chapter, the chapter of tireless service and ceaseless dispensing of grace. Within those tiny shards, in the pain and loss, lies the source of life and hope for countless people, for those who will be nurtured, healed, and continue the journey that no one else can undertake. Brokenness, in the eyes of many, is an end, an irreparable shattering, a painful residue of a process that one can only wait to finish, to vanish into the darkness of disappointment and despair. But this is truly a great misunderstanding, a fundamental misperception of the nature of brokenness from the perspective of the Creator. Brokenness is not the full stop, not the end of all hope and dreams. On the contrary, it is the way God uses to shape a life, a soul, a person capable of carrying life, healing, and a supernatural influence that transcends all worldly limits. You may not see it yet. You may be clinging to the shards of yourself, fragments that seem impossible to piece back together. But it is precisely in those broken pieces that God is writing a story of resurrection, renewal, and greatness you have never imagined. Let your heart calm and reflect on this. It is in the deepest cracks, the coldest winters, where brokenness that seems like destruction actually births the source of new strength, of an irresistible maturity. You may be in a season of brokenness, a phase of loneliness, loss, and pain, but don't give up quickly. Don't let yourself be defeated by overwhelming darkness, because it is precisely at that moment when your ego is defeated, when all pride is shattered, when all false securities are stripped away, that God is preparing a new journey for you, a new chapter in your life you never thought possible. It is a chapter of life, of healing, and of influence that cannot be measured by human eyes or worldly standards. Every wound, every fall, every pain is an invitation for you to step into maturity, an invitation to allow yourself to be transformed, to be shaped by the hand of the Creator. Do not look at brokenness as a sign of failure, but see it as a starting step, a door opening for you to enter a new life, a life that can touch and change other souls, a life that can spread light and hope to places where darkness seemed to reign forever. And at this moment, as you listen to these words, open your heart to receive comfort and encouragement from the undying light of God, who never abandons those who call upon Him in trouble. Believe that nothing in your life is wasted, not even the things that seem the most broken, because it is in those fragments that new life is sown, healing begins, and supernatural influence is laid as a foundation. Thank you for accompanying Eternal Light on this deep journey of discovering the meaning of brokenness and how it is not only an end, but also a beginning of a life full of meaning and influence. See you in the next videos, where we will explore more profound truths and guiding lights for life. Wishing you peace, and never stop believing in the power of transformation from broken pieces. Goodbye, and see you again.